Okay, hello again to my talk about RHQ and Jopr system management with that. My name is Heiko Rupp. I work for Red Hat, and you see my contact data here. Now, when I was asked about giving the talk, I submitted a proposal as system management with RHQ. I got an answer back, you're talking about Jopr. Yeah, that's cool, let's do that. And now I'm also RHQ here and JBoss operations network. What it's actually about is we have these open source management projects, RHQ and Jopr, and then we have Red Hat or JBoss, a commercial tool called JBoss Operations Network, which is built of those two other buzzwords. Now, in the past, and I will show some history slides later on, we have had Project RHQ as a foundation, and on top of that, we had Jopr, which were the JBoss management bits, and on top of both is built JBoss on. And since last September, we are in the lucky position that we only have RHQ anymore. So while you will still see the term Jopr out there, it is being phased out. RHQ is the open source project. And RHQ is living under rhqproject.org. So that's the main wiki documentation side of the whole project. You don't have to write that down, or you can of course, but I will post my slides at least to my blog, and this gets syndicated to the JBoss blogs feed, and I guess FOSDEM will have them somewhere linked as well. So it's rhqproject.org. We are using some other infrastructure for a few services, like the Fedora hosted Git repository for all of our source code, and also the Bugzilla from Red Hat from now on. We did have in the past two separate Jira instances, one at rhqproject.org and another one at jboss.org/Jopr. But this was always a little bit of pain for people to decide if they wanted to report a bug or a feature, in which issue tracker should that go. So that's also gone now. The Jopr Jira exists, but should no longer allow you to post new bugs. So everything in that area here in the Git repo, you will also find the source of all the bits from RHQ, and you don't have to go to two different repos as in the past. It's now completely integrated. But before I continue with those boring slides, let's go off for some demo and have a look at the application itself. So it's about monitoring and management of systems, of servers. From where we come from, it's mostly targeted at JBoss services and servers, like the JBoss application server, JBoss Cache, Hibernate, and Tomcat or embedded Tomcat, but that's not exclusive. I will show you later a list of plugins that are available. That list is not even complete, and it's simple to write a new plugin for a new resource to manage. So this one here is the start page, the dashboard. You see information about what you have in inventory. There's a thing called a platform. That's basically a machine where services run on. So one Linux machine is one platform, another Linux machine is a second platform, and so on. So this is currently my laptop here. It's one platform with 10 servers and 289 services. I'll show you the means, so just take it for given at the moment. Those server and service, where you put them, your stuff, is sort of arbitrary anyway, so it's part grouping. We don't have any groups defined, and we're currently getting 107 metrics, which is measurement values in per minute from the measurement subsystems. Up here we have an order discovery portlet, so when the system will show them to you up there, and then you can decide to take them into your entry or decide if you don't want it. So, for example, if you just fire up a new Jopr application server for testing, while the discovery run is coming in, it will be discovered and shown up in this portlet, like that guy. And when you say, no, that's not my production one, I just wanted to test something and I don't want to monitor it, you don't take it into inventory, but you click on ignore, and then you have some recently added resources, so you see a history, what's got added to the system. You can define some favorites. You see here about recent alerts, which alerts got fired. I will talk about alerts more in detail later on. Here you can see operations on resources that were triggered recently or that are scheduled to be triggered. So it's possible, for example, for the system that you define, reboot my Jopr AS server every night because I know it has a memory leak, or my application has a memory leak, not the server itself. And you can just reboot it like that. And here we also have has alerts or currently unavailable list of things, so it's sort of a list of things to learn about. So now when you, let's have a look at one platform, for example. That's my laptop. Here you see a bunch of icons. When I go to the server list, it's even more impressive, I guess. And these items stand for some subsystems within the system. So you have this little icon here that looks like a monitor with a zigzag curve. That's about the monitoring subsystem. Then you have this little notepad. Yes, thanks. It's about the inventory. I will show you the subsystems again in a moment. The flag for alerts. This display button for operations. This thing which looks like an Explorer icon, a mini Explorer icon, is about a content subsystem. What is it, content? And this one I don't recall at the moment. So you can also see, here the wrench is about configuring the resource. You can see not every resource has all of the icons. That depends on the plugin that you write and how much you want to support in the plugin. Sometimes it makes no sense to configure a resource because for a platform, for a Linux machine itself, not for a service like etc host, but for the machine itself, it very often makes no sense to configure it. So it's or if it's a hardware chip that you just are monitoring and has no option to upload values into it, we don't have a configure icon. So let's go back to my platform, or perhaps so I think I get many of these unavailable icons. The red icons are due to the new network address that I just got from the DHCP system, because the system expects the same host to be at the same place. That's yeah, some of those effects. Normally in a production environment, you would have fixed IP addresses for that. So this summary page, each resource has a summary page, so you can, it's sort of a dashboard for that resource. You see the recent measurement values, and so the last one that got measured, and a little graph on how it developed in the past. You see a list of alerts and how severe they were, so it's medium, low, or high priority. Some out-of-bound metrics, I'll show that in a minute. So configuration updates, you see those, so nothing happened here. Packages are uploaded, and these are the events. Okay. So let's go here for the used swap space. For each metric, you can have graphs. You have the small graphs and then the large ones like this. And the system is calculating bounds between those metrics normally are are measured, or the default values sort of. So it takes the last n days of data and computes the bounds. And now when the value is going over or below the bound, it will trigger an out-of-bound exception sort of. And this is shown because very often you know the active thread count is between, for your application, between 70 and 80. And if this one goes up to 120, you know it's an error condition. It's even possible to alert then on this being out of bounds or out of bounds by a certain percentage. Okay. So this is the default monitor tab. So by default, on the monitoring system, subsystem, you implement in the plugin that you want to monitor your values, and then you implement a little bit of code, and it do all the values back, and these get automatically graphed in here. This is relatively generic. We have algorithms to compute the right percentage so that you don't write value range, but it's sort of default in those systems. We can also have tables. If you say, well, I rather want to know the exact minimum and maximum values than the graph. And now we have something in addition to the pure numeric values. These are the so-called traits. Traits are always considered as string values, and when the system is taking them, it compares them with the previous trait value, and if the two are the same, no new record is stored in the database, and the database only stores an updated version when this trait changes. So for example, when an operating system update comes in from 10.6.2 to 10.6.3, this trait value will change, and you will see when it has changed. About the database size for monitoring data anyway, we are compressing the data, so we have 1 hour aggregate, 6 hour aggregates, and 1 day aggregate, so we can keep that by default up to a year. So your database won't explode. You're purging the raw data and keep the compressed one, so you get still a very good overview of what happened in the past without all the huge amount of data. Okay, then we have here a little sub-tab about availability. So you see when did your resource go up and down, and how many failures and up for how many, and things like that. It's also per resource. And the last one, that's a tab about the schedules. On this tab, you specify which of the metrics that the plugin offers for this specific resource type, for this macOS platform, for example, you want to measure, and how often, in which interval. If you have 10 platforms, you can either set a default so that gets applied to when you import a new platform, or do that on a complete group of resources. You don't have to go into each one of it, but you can still override on a per resource level. Okay, then the inventory tab here. That's you have the overview here about what's the name of the resource, and then which direct children does it have. That's probably not that much of interest for the platform. One thing that's more interesting is down here, that you can manually add resources that do not get auto-discovered. In my case, here on my machine, it's the Postgres database server, because the plugin expects some default values which are just not true on my machine. But I can still go in, say, okay, add a Postgres server, and then on the next page here, you specify connection properties, and when you did the right thing, it will just be taken into inventory, and all its child resources, which are the databases on the database server, plus all the tables, also get pulled into inventory. show later. So for the moment, operations will be the last subtab. So you have, again, per resource type, various operations that you can execute. So, for example, you process list for a Unix machine. The next step, you specify when this should start. Either you can execute immediately. This is then triggering an action on the actual resource, remote resource. So here it's all in the same box, of course, but if I have two boxes, it will really reach out on the other box and execute the operation on that other one. You can also specify a different start time and recurrence. How often do we want to do that, and when should it end? So it's really like in Chrome, you can just say, okay, do that every hour or every day or whatever. Then you click on schedule. Let's do that just once. Click on schedule. Here completed operations, and you can go in. Click on it, and here you see the results. It's probably in a different format than what you would expect when you just know the output of PS minus whatever. But it's still useful, and it's just one example of what you can do. When I'm going back here on the summary tab, you also see it now listed here, this recent operation. And then there is this timeline in here, where you can also see on a more graphical view what happened with your system. So you see it was down here, this red bar, this light red bar. Here we did have an operation with the green check mark, which means was successful, and when you would get events in, they would show up, or alerts would show up in here as well. That's actually the Simile timeline project from MIT. That's very cool when you want to display those timelines. It's really helpful. It's written in Java script, so it's sometimes a bit hairy when you supply the wrong data or not exactly in the format that it expected, especially when you have those strange things like German umlauts in your system, or time zones which are not US, but when you work around that, it's really a cool library. Here in the tree, that's something that we're currently working on. You can again browse through your resources. Here it's only this one platform that you see. When you want to go to another platform, you have at the moment to go to the, for example, here resources menu. There's a little error in the current version that I'm having here in the developer version, and then just select servers or other platforms. When you go on a resource in here, like that one, for example, you can also right click. No, that doesn't. This one doesn't support right click. Let me find a different one. Okay, so we are currently working on this tree and revamping it so it looks like the right-click support is currently disabled. So it should work in the next version that you get out there. So, one other thing that we have, you have seen, we have this summary page per resource, and we have this dashboard, but often that's not enough. So if you want to know about out-of-bound resources, all about your system, or which one is the worst outlier, it's a bit hard to click on each resource and to compare them by hand. So what we also have here are the so-called subsystem views, where you have for various things like configuration changes, metrics, operations, a view about this subsystem over the whole system. So here it's about the suspect metrics, which are these outliers. They are now sorted by the out of range factor, and the one which is the worst outlier is just on top, so you know on what to concentrate. So it's easy. And here you can also go and for operations, you see all the operations that happened during some time, some minutes, where you can filter or on resource what happens. It's only this one, so no big deal at the moment. This is the first of the two history slides that I was talking about. We started actually in 2006 with the current line of programming, and in early 2008 we released RHQ1, which was the framework and most of the bits of it, but not the Jopr part, which was still closed source at that time. Then here in end of 2008 we released RHQ11, JBoss on 2.1, JBoss Operations Network Product, and after that also the Jopr bit. So this one plus that one sort of gave this one. And then we had these two lines of development. One of the results that came out of that was also the embedded Jopr, which many of you probably have seen as the embedded console in Application Server 5. And currently we released RHQ 1.3, and in September last year we were finally able to put those Jopr 2.3 plus bits into RHQ 1.4, so it's one unified source line. We released a community release of 1.4 build 01, and in this build we had some issues with people that wanted to upgrade from previous versions of Jopr to that version, because our plugin system considered the 2.3 version plugins as newer than the 1.4 version plugins. So we decided in the process, first we are putting some different emphasis and more emphasis on the whole development, and also about just the incompatibility with the version numbers, that the next version of RHQ will be RHQ3. And last week we released the second community version of it, RHQ 3.00 build 2, which has the plugins. And this is now the mainline in development, RHQ3. We don't have a release date yet, but we plan at least on giving out community releases every 6 weeks to 2 months. And it's expected that from RHQ3 you will also get the next version of JBoss on, which will probably be JBoss on 3 as well. So, after this history review, I want to give a quick architecture overview. The central thing that we have here is the RHQ server, or a cluster thereof. So when you want to do load balancing or failover, you can have one or more servers in your data center. It's even possible, if you have 2 data centers, to have one in each or 2 in each, and then have so-called affinity groups that when an agent, I'll come to that in a minute, is talking to one data center or one server in one data center, and this server is going down, that it will try to talk with the other server in the data center before switching over to the other data center, which is normally not wanted. So, on the server you have the access for the administrator. It's the GUI, the graphical user interface, as I have just shown. We have a command line interface on it. That's written also in Java, and it uses JavaScript as its language internally. So you can write expressions in JavaScript with complete control structures and everything. It even has auto-completion for some terms, for resource names and other stuff. So it's quite comfortable and quite powerful. And then we have experimental support for web dev, so you can mount your resource tree as a web dev directory in your Explorer or Finder or whatever. The server hosts also the database connection. Default databases for us are Postgres and Oracle. There is some support from H2 database. That's an embedded one, which basically the successor of what was called Hypersonic in the past. This is mainly used for demoing or testing purposes. It's not for production. And then there is some experimental support for SQL Server, or for one version of SQL Server. And the other big component that we have here, that we need, is the agent. This dotted dashed line shows a platform. So on each platform that you want to monitor and manage stuff, you need an agent. And this agent gets all the agent plugins, and only these agent plugins talk to your managed resources. So in a firewall scenario, you only have the communication between agent and server, but never between server and a target managed resource. So, yes, please. Okay, no question. I was talking a lot about resources. Our definition of a resource is everything that can be managed or monitored. I've written a plugin that monitors a thermometer chip. So it's just a thermometer sensor, little like a transistor that size with 3 pins on the one wire bus. So here it's only monitoring and no managing. But a resource could also be any process or a thread count or a memory setting or anything like that. And then each resource has a corresponding resource type. A resource type is, for example, Linux or Mac OS. It's JBoss AS. It's Tomcat. It's an individual data source. It's a database table, things like that. And the last thing which we have is the resource category. This sort of shows the place in the resource hierarchy. You have seen before platform, which is the machine. Then the next level is the server, which could be, for example, a JBoss application server. It could be a Tomcat. This whole thing is sort of recursive. The server can host the server. JBoss AS has this embedded Tomcat server, so that's recursive. And then usually below a server you have the services, which is a data source in JBoss AS, which is a web application in Tomcat. There is no hard rule on when to use a server or when to use a service. Usually like that when you have a subsystem or complete process, you model it as a server. And when it's individual parts of the subsystem, you model it as a service. But it's really like as you feel it, where it's just fixed. Okay, that's this thermometer chip. And this is again showing this hierarchy, who hosts what. There are even platform services that are not hanging on the server, but directly on the platform, like network interfaces. Okay, then we have those subsystems. I have shown that already in the UI walkthrough, so I'm not going to mention it a lot. Again, it depends on what your plugin defines, which of the subsystem is available for a specific resource type. Usually you want to do monitoring. Availability is technically also an own subsystem, but it's your fault kind of the monitoring, sort of. So you always have some inventory, but many resources just don't have any connection properties, no nothing, so you don't need to implement anything in there. So I want to talk a bit about extensibility of the whole thing. We have now perspectives. Okay, this should automatically pop up. You can write server-side plugins that are running in the server that extend the server functionality. One of those is the perspectives, which give you a new UI look or new views into the UI. And then we have the alert plugins that are alert senders. And then you can write for the agents those agent plugins. I'm gonna go through all of those now. Perspectives, that's like UI plugins, so it's possible to write a complete new UI screen that's hosted on a tab like this monitor inventory that you have seen. Just next to that, in a new tab. This can be written in Java, just a normal raw file, or it is or will be possible to even host a complete external application that's written in PHP, but that gets some information when it's called, and that can even also link back into the main UI or core UI. We have various extension points, so it's possible to change entries in the top level menu. You can add new tabs, and you can write new pages or exchange existing pages. Then the agent plugins, that's basically the functionality. Those guys that talk to the managed resource, that work with the managed resource. Only those talk to the resource, that's important again. So it's basically metadata plus some Java code. The metadata defines the capabilities of your plugin. So when you say, I want to monitor those 2, 3, 4 values, only those 2, 3 values will be shown in the GUI, in the schedules tab or the monitoring tab, no matter how many data the plugin would provide otherwise. The metadata also wires the Java classes together. The plugin can auto discover resources, so it's possible when, as I said, when a new resource of that type is coming up, that it gets automatically added to the inventory. And there's a generator available that can help you with writing the plugin. There is a big list of plugins available right now. Many of those at RHQ project in the Git repo, but also from third parties. And I've written a script plugin that can even defer the measurement taking to some scripts in JRuby or JavaScript. So many administrators don't like writing Java code, but they know scripting languages like Ruby well enough. So even that's possible. Okay. Here finally is the 3 boxes. So you have the plugin descriptor, you need to write that, that's a bit of XML. You have to write a discovery class. That's only to implement one method that in the shortest version just sort of returns its input. And then the component class that defines all the facets for all the subsystems that you want to implement it. And yeah. So this is a quick run of the plugin generator. It's a standalone Java archive. It asks a few questions. Here, do you want platform, server, service at the root of your resource tree from that plugin? Where should it live in the package hierarchy? Where should it live in the file system? So which are the class names? And now what subsystem do you want to support? Do you want to support events? Do you want to support monitoring, etc., etc.? And when all of that is done, it will write out a POM file from the formation and a skeleton plugin descriptor with a few to-do tags in there, and also skeleton Java classes that are fully stubbed out for all the subsystems that you want to support. So you can directly compile it and deploy it. It won't do much, of course, but it's already made plugin. I have created a video which I hope will be online soon about how to do that. And there are also a lot of online articles out now on how to write a plugin, so there should be a lot of resources. And of course, there's the source code of the existing plugins. That's just a list of available agent plugins. I don't want to go through that in detail. This list is not exhausted, so I think the source is the Git repo, the source of knowledge. But there is, you see big support for just JBoss software, JBoss AS, AS5 support, JBoss cache. We have an SNMP trap key, so other devices like routers can send traps to the system, which get then incorporated in the event subsystem. We have a generic JMX server here, which allows you to monitor any Java 5 resource. I've written a blog post in the past on how to monitor your Eclipse IDE with the help of this JMX plugin. So even that's possible. And then outside of our domain, there is Infinispan for the successor of JBoss cache monitoring. There is for MobiSense for various parts of MobiSense support. JBoss ESE. Mark Proctor just told me that they have for their rules stuff some support, and I'm sure there are more plugins out there that I don't know about. So after the agent plugins and the managed resource, monitored resource, I'm coming back to the server-side plugins about how to extend your server. Those server-side plugins live in the server, as the name says, and they basically have access to all server-side methods. So it's possible for you to write a plugin that's, for example, doing reports on all your resources. Or when in inventory, you could write a report about how many Windows 2003 servers do you have in inventory, or things like that. We will include a real reporting engine sometime in the future, hopefully, but you could use it for those purposes. Again, it's some metadata plus Java code, and there are some different kinds of server-side plugins. All of them have different versions that extend a base server plugin XML format. And, one of the most used from my side is the alert senders that I'm coming to. Other plugins are content sources. We have, for example, in JBoss, a JBoss patch feed, where customers can get updates to their JBoss AS servers. And this is also a server-side plugin that's contacting the customer support portal, pulling a feed with the changes, and the customer can then say in JBoss on, okay, please apply those changes to my application servers. It's also supported by the server-side plugin. The alert plugins are a specialized form of server-side plugins. Basically, what you have to do is, again, write a little bit of XML and then implement this one method, alert sender.send, and the argument that you get, alert that just got fired, and then you have to react on it. I will show an example on the next slide. Nice thing is, we have preferences in the UI for the whole plugin, so it's possible if you have, let's say, an IRC sender plugin that you set as the preferences which IRC server do you want to contact, and perhaps some credentials on how to contact that. And then alert specific will be, for example, the channel this alert should go to. I'll show that in the UI in a few minutes. And these get just injected. You don't have to do any work to get at those values. They are just there for free. The UI is just driven by the metadata. We have a configuration system, and this just renders the input fields for all of that, which is powerful enough in many, many cases, but sometimes it's not enough. For example, when you want to do extensive searches or list picker boxes, then it's still possible to write a custom UI. You write an XHTML snippet, a facelet, plus a backing bean in Java, package all of that together, and then you have a custom UI. Also here we have a script language alert sender where you can define those methods or the implementing method in JRuby or in Ruby and have this delivered via Ruby instead of having to write Java code. So it's again appealing, I guess, to administrators. This is a list of available alert sender plugins, subjects and roles. Subjects are just the user within the RHQ server, and roles are things like JBoss operators or system operators or business people or something like that, and they will just send emails to those. Then we have MobiSense support. So the plugin is talking to a MobiSense server, which is then initiating a voice call to you and reads the error message on the phone. I did have in the past a version where you were even able to do touch tones to answer back to the server, for example, to reboot a resource. This is currently not available in this alert sender plugin version. I still need to look for a good idea on how to integrate it, so you are free to help. Short message via developerguard.com. They have a REST interface where you can talk REST to an endpoint to send short messages. Then microblog, that's Twitter or StatusNet feeds. That's interesting, I guess, for when you deploy a StatusNet server within your enterprise, and people can just have their Twitter client talk to that StatusNet server and get the updates from there as well. Email is just email sending to anyone. We can then send SNMP traps and also talk to IRC. I have a bot on IRC that's reporting alerts. And again, the script language. And one thing that we did have in older version, but which currently vanished in the operation, in the alert plugin version, is the operation sender, that you can trigger an operation like we have seen on an arbitrary resource in your inventory. So it will be possible if you find out that your data source is running at full connections for the whole time, even if you only will expect 5 open connections at a time, you can, for example, reboot the whole application server if you think that's a good idea to fix this problem. Okay, that's a quick alert plugin example. So that's the wiring. You write this alert plugin descriptor. It's a bit shortened up there because of all these XML namespace headers that you have to implement, which I don't want to show here. So basically you have to define a name, and you can define a package. That's just a Java package where your code lives in, and you don't have to specify it here on the plugin class later on. Here in this block, server plugin plugin configuration, you specify the preferences. That's global for all instances of this alert sender. And then down here, alert configuration, these are the properties that are specific for one instantiation of the sender. We will show it in a minute what's meant here. You need to provide a short name of the sender, which gets shown when you want to define a new alert notification. You select from a list of senders, and that's the short name that you will see. The Java code for the whole thing here is again this package, public class URL sender, that's that guy. You have this method send. Here you just define your Java code. I'm getting my data from preferences, so the preference value is there for you. You say get simple, simple value. Host name is the one we defined here in metadata, and this second argument is the default value if the operator or the user did not enter anything. You just specify default value. The same here, alert parameters, that's that part. So the data is just here, you have only this one method call to get it. Here I'm opening HTTP URL connection to that host and port, getting an output stream and writing my message. It's a bit simplified, of course. And at the end, When you're done, you need to return a sender result object. This sender result object expects that you specify if it was successful or failure and a message. And then there's a third state not shown on this slide, which is a deferred email, which means this plugin just computed a list of email addresses that should be sent off, but it's not able to determine if sending will be successful later, because that's only done after all the email addresses have been collected. So this plugin cannot know it. And luckily it does not have to implement this sending, because this is just available for free.
Yeah, a little bit more than 5 minutes left.
Okay. It's close to the end, but so okay. You see here, that's in this plugin, that part. I have just my alert notifications. I have this MobiSense sender. I can show that outside later on if anyone wants to see it. Here, that's the alert configuration. The part was down here on the XML snippet. So that's just a default rendering, and here you add your value. For this roles plugin, we have this custom UI. You see it's not as nice as the provided one, but this is a little bit more complex with those pickers where you can put stuff from left to right and it disappears on the left list and gets to the right one. So this is not so you can just write it as you want. And then the last thing, system configuration, plugins. So here's a list of agent and server-side plugins. Let's just go into one. So learn MobiSense one. Configure. So here, that's this box is this global configuration section that was up in the XML snippets. Again, rendered for you before. So, okay, some URLs for you. RHQproject.org. It has pointers to all of the others, of course. Then my blog, I'm often writing about RHQ and how to extend it and how to do things. So if you are interested, it's something you might want to follow. And then we have at jopr.org this feed, this RSS aggregator, feed aggregator. So all of our feeds, including mine, about RHQ will be fed into that one. So thanks for listening, and I will take questions. But before that, I have one more thing. Google Summer of Code is coming. We are planning to participate in that. If you are interested in that, contact me please.